Hello friends, good afternoon and welcome to the EduSite Network. Our topic of discussion today is the Vedic age, and for this very lecture we have with us in our studio Dr. Shankar Kumar, Assistant Professor, Department of History, Hindu College, University of Delhi. Sir has been teaching for more than 15 years and with this introduction, I'd like to welcome Sir for our discussion and lecture today. So friends, let us welcome Sir. Thank you Sir for coming.
Thank you Urvashi. And good afternoon viewers. Today's topic of discussion is the Vedic Times, and when we say Vedic Times, let's spare a little bit of thought as to why do we use this label of Ved to identify this time bracket, which broadly is from say around 1500 BC to around 600 BC. There is a further segregation of this huge time bracket of around 1000 years into two parts, that is early Vedic, which takes into consideration the times between 1500 BC to around 1000 BC, while the later Vedic times has reference to the period between 1000 BC to around 600 BC. But why do we say this as a Vedic period is because the chief source of information about this age actually comes from the literary source that we know as the Vedas. The earliest portions of the Vedas being compiled as Rig Ved, and that happens to be the chief source material for the early Vedic period or Rig Vedic period, the time bracket we just spoke of, that is 1500 to 1000 BC, and the subsequent period, that is later Vedic times. Again, the chief source of information happens to be the other Vedas, that is Yajurved and Atharva Ved. I'm leaving out Samaved because Samaved essentially is a compilation of Rigvedic hymns in a form which renders it for singing purpose, and therefore it is not in terms of the substance or the content of Samved that we are using this. So they constitute the chief source material so far as the details of this period, the details of this age are concerned, and therefore we use this label Vedic age. Now before we move on to the details of the period or the times, let's also understand the scope of our discussion. This is with reference to not only the geography or the limitation of the geography within which our discussion would be valid, but also in terms of the limitation of the source itself. In terms of geography, although there is no direct reference to the places which or there could be the problem of identifying the ancient references of places with their modern counterparts, but overall looking at the ecological description in Rig Ved or the other Vedas and other details with reference to the rivers mentioned there, which have been identified with their present counterparts. Some of them have become almost extinct now. So, or other details with relation to the flora and faunal details, historians have by and large to their satisfaction have worked out that the early Vedic period basically coincides with what we know as the Sapta Sindhu area, and the details of that we shall be talking about as we proceed in our discussion. Whereas by the time we come to the later Vedic times, that is say around 1000 BC onwards to around 600 BC, the geographical canvas somewhat shifts although there are disagreements amongst historians whether there is a clear-cut kind of movement from the early Vedic times to the later Vedic times in terms of geography. Nevertheless, by and large, it is believed that in the later Vedic times there was this kind of a shift of focus to the eastern part of the Gangetic belt. So, the middle Gangetic belt would in today's terms one can say the area between say Allahabad to Bhagalpur in Bihar. So, the middle Gangetic plain have also been colonized by the Vedic people who had increasingly been taking to agriculture as the chief mode of livelihood by around this time. Whereas, as we will see that to begin with, they come as pastoral people. They come across to us as pastoral people, essentially pastoral people with a little bit of awareness about agriculture, which was certainly peripheral to their livelihood. Now, this is the broad geography that we shall be tracking from the Saptasindhu area, which is Indus and the other rivers of Punjab area, and in subsequent times we move eastwards up to the middle Gangetic plains. So, this is about the geography of this period. So, when we talk of the details, let's not presume that such changes were informing other parts of India as well. So, the entire Deccan, the southern peninsular area or the northeast was not undergoing similar changes. So, they were at a different stage of historical development, and this is not to deny that there was nothing happening. There were people, there could be people living in these areas, but they had not come up to the stage of intensive agriculture. As we shall see, they had come to the Vedic people around 1000 BC onwards. So, that is the geographical part of it. In terms of the limitation of the source, let's also understand that Rig Veda as a source of historical information was not written with the intent of informing the posterity about the developments of the time. Rig Veda in its own period, the period that we just spoke of, or for that matter the entire corpus of Vedic literature that we are aware of, in its period of inception or the period of its creation, they were not even written down. So, they survived for a quite long duration of time in oral form. And it is only much subsequently that these hymns or the content of the Vedic literature were actually penned down. So, nevertheless, one good thing about the Vedic sources, particularly from the point of view of a historian, is that much of the distortions could not creep into the Vedic literature, as usually is the case with other oral sources of information, because there was a very strict rule and tradition of singing the Rigvedic hymns or the Vedic mantras. So, the rules surrounding the chanting of Vedic hymns, pronunciation of the words, and who will actually sing them, they were all extremely restricted. So, there was a lot of paraphernalia associated with it, and it was definitely within the precinct of religiosity that it survived, and therefore there is not much instance of distortions creeping into it, although the entire content was not composed at one go. So, historians have looked at the content of Rig Veda itself, and historians do say that some portion of Rig Veda were written somewhat earlier, and some other portions are of a later date, although it cannot go beyond 1000 BC. Now again, dating of the literature is again not explicitly provided by the literature itself, as usually is the case with several other ancient Indian sources. They would not explicitly tell us about the date in which they were composed. So historians have to work it out on the basis of corroborative evidence, on the basis of cross-cultural comparisons of the details, and it is on that basis that the skeletal chronology of early and later Vedic periods have been worked out. So, we should keep in mind that essentially the Vedic literature was created, or the Vedic mantras were composed in order to make the gods happy. So, the purpose was not to record the mundane facts of everyday life, or some kind of a political chronology of events, or other details which happens to be the focus area for historical exploration in our generation, but this is essentially some hymns which were composed to propitiate God, to make them happy, so that they get something in return, and that is how one needs to understand this. Nevertheless, in the absence of other sources, a historian has to chiefly rely on whatever is available, and historians resort to decoding the information given in the Vedic literature in order to elicit whatever is important, relevant from the mundane everyday life point of view. And therefore, there is every likelihood of the text or the content rendering itself to other kinds of interpretations, and that is what we get to see in history, as you can figure out that there are claims and counterclaims amongst historians, not only relating to the date, but also with relation to the chief way of life, the usual way of life, the lifestyle of the Vedic people, whether they were aware of urban centers, whether they were socialized with the idea of forts or fortified settlements, to what extent was their reliance chiefly on agriculture, or it was not so. So these are the issues which keep historians engaged in some sort of a debate. And if one were to talk about the polar viewpoints or polarity of the debate, even in terms of chronology, there is one extreme viewpoint endorsed by quite a few historians who would rather argue that the Vedic literature, the period, the chronological framework of Vedic literature should be stretched to a period before the Harappan times as well, and Harappa being a part, or Harappan civilization being a part of Vedic culture as such, and the post-Harappan times also constituting a continuum to the Vedic literature, and it stretches up to the 6th century BC. So one viewpoint stretches it to the pre-Harappan, you can say, period as well, and the other viewpoint which presently is the dominant viewpoint backed by archaeological findings as well, and some contrasts which can be seen with reference to Harappan civilization and Vedic culture. So, this viewpoint is placing Harappan period from say around 2500 BC to around 1700 1800 BC, and then it presupposes some kind of a gap from 1700 BC to around 1500 BC, and 1500 BC is regarded as the period when the first band of the Indo-European or the Indo-Aryans as they are called, because those groups of Indo-European people who came from around say Caspian Sea area and came towards India, Indus river crossing Iran. So, those who stayed put at Iran, they are referred to as Indo-Iranians, while those who came up to Indus and crossed it as well, they are referred to as Indo-Aryans. And this viewpoint places the chronology of the Vedic period from around 1500 BC to 600 BC. So, we are not getting into the debate of the chronological bracket which should be used. Of course, there are claims and counterclaims, but we shall be chiefly focusing on what constitutes the dominant and more studied kind of response to whatever data that we have in relation to the Vedic period, and therefore, we are considering the period 1500 BC to 600 BC as the Vedic period chiefly. Of course, we in the course of our discussion we shall come to the point of the distinction between Harappan civilization and Vedic times, or for that matter even the continuous elements which can be argued with relation to the Harappan period and the Vedic period. Now, having said this, let us understand that this period is extremely important period of transformation, and therefore, if we are to understand the entire sequence of events constituting ancient India, or for that matter even the contemporary society, quite a few residues of the times do survive even to the present times. So, Vedas have constituted some kind of an eternal reference point even in subsequent periods. So, the present phase of the mainstream religion in India, the Hinduism, also draws its lineage from the Vedic sacrifices or Vedic principles and Vedic presuppositions. Of course, when we talk of other Brahmanical sources, say Upanishads or for that matter Puranas and so forth, the present crop of gods who are more popular actually are Puranic gods. But their lineage with Vedas or the Vedic gods is something which has always fascinated people at large, and even the lawgivers, even the texts composed in subsequent times do make it a point that they do show some kind of a lineage with the Vedic times. So, the point is that somehow at the ideational level as well, Vedas did constitute a very important kind of a magnet for people to keep referring to. You will encounter several treatises in ancient India claiming itself as the fifth Ved. And that again tells us about the iconic proportion that Vedas as a corpus of literature must have come to acquire over a period of time in India. So there are works of philosophy, there are works of medicine who'd claim that this work is actually in continuum to the 4 Vedas, and it constitutes the 5th Ved. So powerful is the imagery of a Veda, or it had captured people's imagination to that extent. So important the text remained in the minds of people for a long time, and it continues to be the Vedic sanctity, so to say, constitute even in the present times. It is a very important reference point. So that is about the Vedic sources as such, and the power that emanated from it, and to the extent to which even in subsequent times people were fascinated with this as a source of legitimacy. Also, it was a powerful source of legitimacy for several other texts. Now, having said this, let's come to the content part of it, and if we talk of the Rig Veda, if we look at Rig Veda, it has 1028 hymns or shlokas organized into 10 chapters referred to as 10 mandals, and of the 10 mandals, the book 2 to book 7 constitute what we know as family book, or they stand as the early stratum of the content, and book 1 plus book 8 to 10, they probably are of subsequent period, that is, they are late additions to Rig Veda. Of course, it cannot be pushed beyond 1000 BC. So book 1 and book 8 to 10 were probably added to the family books, that is book 2 to 7, around say 900, around say 1000 BC or so. That tells us about the way in which the hymns of Rig Veda were organized. And therefore, when a historian analyzes the details given in the say chapter 1 or chapter 8 to 10, then they cannot be understood in the same vein as we do with reference to the family books. So that sense of chronology is important, that sense of distinction is somewhat important, which is embedded in the way the book itself is organized. And this practice or this tradition of adding something to a book without actually pronouncing it with reference to date in which such additions are being made is something which plagues ancient India or ancient Indian sources in general. So this is something which is not restricted to the Vedas as a source, but several other treatises of ancient India do suffer from this problem, in the sense that whatever additions or deletions they were made as revision of a particular text, or as some kind of a late addition to a particular text, they were made without actually referring to the date or the person who was actually carrying it out. So that becomes a problem for decoding the text, and this practice is referred to as interpolation and extrapolation. Extrapolation, when you add something towards the beginning or the end of a particular book, and interpolation when something is inserted in between, say in between the chapters you insert some new episode or some new details. So and you don't pronounce the date when you are actually doing it, or it goes in the name of the original author himself. That if one has to make an uncritical study of these sources, then we might fall into this kind of a chronological trap, which is very much embedded in the way these texts as a historical source have come to us. The details of later Vedic texts is limited not only to Yajurved and Atharvaved, but there are a number of Brahmanas which are actually associated with different Vedic schools. They are also actually part of the later Vedic literature, that is from 1000 to 600 BC, and these Brahmanas were the earliest works in prose in Sanskrit. So this is a distinct thing that we are talking of with reference to the Brahmanas. They essentially go on, of course it has its Vedic lineage in the sense that these Brahmanas offer explanations or discussions on several rituals and mantras which are spoken of in the Vedas. So they go as some kind of explanatory notes to whatever is described in the Vedic sources. And there are several Brahmanas, some of them you might be aware of. There is Aitriya Brahman, there is Shatpatha Brahman, there is a Jaiminiya Brahman, and so forth. Then in addition to the Brahmanas, we also have another genre of literature which actually belongs to the later Vedic times, the Aranyaks and the Upanishads. And it seems that these texts were composed around 600 BC, so the terminal date of the later Vedic period. You must have heard of Brihadraranya Upanishad, you must have heard of Chandogya Upanishad. These Upanishads delve into philosophy, and this is somewhat in contrast to the way Vedas go about describing things, or the way they conceive of the world around themselves, the gods and goddesses. Even the mode of worship actually is supposed to have undergone a change from the beginning of the Rigvedic period to the end of the Rigvedic period, when Upanishads, who of course are a part of Brahmanical text, but the flavor, the religious flavor that Upanishads betray is somewhat different from the Rigvedic times, in the sense that it gives more prominence to the metaphysical and philosophical orientation of people. Knowledge is attached premium to the ways and means of worshipping. So there is focus on Atma, Paramatma, and some kind of permanence at the ideational level. So there are different sociological explanations as to why this kind of a yearning, this kind of a desire is articulated in Upanishads. And one explanation goes that actually the changes around 600 BC in North India were so profound that the original religious sensibilities argued in the Rig Veda and other Vedas, which were predicated on a very simple pastoral kind of lifestyle, village oriented life. And in contrast, we have the changed landscape of 600 BC, where urban centers proliferate, where trade and commerce is prospering, where monarchical territorial states have become order of the day. So it is a very transformed world in which philosophy, or in which Upanishad as a philosophy is taking birth, and therefore some kind of escape is being experienced through Upanishadic details, and at the level of philosophy, at the level of idea, at least some permanence is spoken of. So Atma, Paramatma, Srishti, and so forth, the permanence of these things are being spoken of. They are more abstract as compared to more materialistic and direct references in Vedic literature, which is again symptomatic of a more simple kind of a society. So that is about the sources, the literary sources. Also important is the fact that since we can infer now that Rigvedic society or early Vedic society was somewhat less socially differentiated, in the sense that it was more equitous or it was less iniquitous as in comparison to the later Vedic times. Therefore, whatever is expressed in Rigved can be taken as a source of general relevance. Whereas, when we come to the later Vedic times, we find that society had become more differentiated, and therefore authorship becomes important. And obviously, as a student of history, we should be mindful of this, that the context, the social context in which later Vedic literature is being generated actually represents the viewpoint of one limited section of society, that is Brahmins. And therefore, there could be the possibility of counterfactual details, counterfactual from the point of view of whatever is contained in later Vedic literature. So, there could be other points of view which existed simultaneously and could not enter into the later Vedic Brahmanical corpus. Whereas, suppose subsequently we look at the Buddhist and Jain literature or Jatak stories and so forth, the kind of picture that we get in terms of morality, in terms of social ethics, in terms of hierarchy, in terms of contestation of that hierarchy and so forth, we do find that there is a contrarian viewpoint simultaneously existing, and whatever is expressed in later Vedic literature is not the entire story about the later Vedic times. So, by and large, we can say that with reference to geography, the valleys of Indus, Saraswati, and Drishadwati, plus the 5 rivers of Punjab, formed the core area of Rigvedic society, and from this area, the material stratum that we get as part of archaeological excavation or archaeological exploration, therefore, can be regarded as some kind of a material counterpart of Rigvedic literature. So, there is no intrinsic connection as such, there is no expressed connection between the two, but the fact that the geography of Rigved has been identified and the period of Rigved has also been identified, say to around from 1500 to 1000 BC. So, whatever material evidence that we get from this area, the area that we just referred to, and which belongs to this particular period, time bracket, can be regarded as material counterpart of the Rigvedic society. And therefore, in archaeological terms, what we understand as later Vedic or say painted graveware culture is actually the counterpart of the Vedic society, the material counterpart of Vedic society. Now, within the painted graveware culture also we have two strata with reference to time. One is which by and large coincides with the time bracket of 1500 BC to 1000 BC, and that is pre-iron using painted graveware culture. Whereas from 1000 BC onwards, the same painted graveware culture starts yielding more and more of iron implements, iron artifacts, and there is some kind of a geographical spread of the iron phase of painted graveware culture into the Gangetic plain further east, which again takes it to later Vedic times. So, the later Vedic period is, you can say, coterminous with the iron phase of painted graveware culture, whereas the early Vedic period is coterminous with the pre-iron using painted graveware culture. Of course, towards the end of the Vedic period, that is around 600 BC, we start getting another more sophisticated and materially advanced culture, particularly from middle Gangetic plains, and that is northern black polished ware, which we know as NBPW culture, and that tells us about the increased material prosperity of 600 BC. And there is association of this culture with some kind of a deluxe pottery, which is again symptomatic of richness and wealth during the period. But in terms of the archaeological evidence, again, if we talk of the non-iron using painted graveware culture, the area or the sites where these cultures have been found roughly are Punjab and Haryana area. That's why we refer to it as Sapt Sindhu area. So, the specific sites are Bhagwanpur, Dadheri, Katplan. So, they are all early Vedic sites because they belong to the same span and the same geography. Most of these sites are located along the Saraswati and Satluj rivers, which are very prominently mentioned in Rig Veda. And if we study Rig Vedic literature, then the impression that we get is that there is too much of preoccupation with pastoral wealth or Pashudhan. And cattle, as even in terms of etymology, we find that the word for cattle is a key word, is the root word for several other terms, and that accords centrality to the pastoral way of life in the Rig Vedic times. So, historians believe that predominantly these people, early Vedic people, must have been pastoral people, and their awareness about agriculture could be peripheral. So, it was not of central concern. We shall see as to what are the evidences with relation to this. In terms of metals, and this is coming from not only the literary sources, but also archaeological sites that we just mentioned, copper and bronze seem to be known to them, but iron does not seem to be so much known to these people in the early phase, that is early Vedic times. And resultantly, since they are pastoral people and pastoralism as a way of life, of course, demands that the settlement, the pastoral people should keep moving to different areas. The fact that they had not still taken to intensive agriculture would also demand that once the resources, the given natural resources get depleted, not only for the human population but also for the cattle, they need to move to newer areas. So, at one point of at one place these people would not stay for a long duration of time. It was only with the arrival of intensive agriculture that the enterprise of agriculture itself demanded that the population should stay at one place, because agriculture is not only cooperative enterprise, but it also requires continuous husbandry, continuous looking after the crops. So, from sowing of the seeds to harvesting, and then again making the fields ready for next round of cultivation and so forth. So, in the absence of agriculture, they kept moving from one area to the other, and therefore, it is not easy to encounter pre-iron painted graveware culture. So, the sources so far as archaeology is concerned for the reconstruction of this period are reasonably scarce, and that again explains as to why there is some kind of a compulsive reliance on Rig-Ved as the chief source material for the reconstruction of the life and times of this period. Now, in the later Vedic times, which coincides with the iron using painted graveware culture, the areas roughly where we get the iron using painted graveware cultures or evidence of it from are Punjab, Rajasthan, Haryana, Delhi, and also western Uttar Pradesh. So, we can see that there is some kind of a eastern shift, and in fact 170 painted graveware sites, in fact more than that. I am referring to a data which is around 10-15 years old. So, more than 170 painted graveware sites have been identified in Satluj and Upper Gangetic Basin, and this includes the sites like Panipat, Purana Kila, Mathura, Bairat, Sonipat, Atranji Kher, Alamgirpur, Hastinapur, Jakher, Jodhpura, Noh, and Shravasti. So, that tells us about the sites where such evidence can be found. Similarly, as we said that in terms of geography we can detect some kind of a shift. So, there is some kind of a widening and shifting of geographical horizons of Rigvedic people the moment they enter into the later Vedic times, that is 1000 BC to 600 BC. So, we have Ganga Yamuna Doab area, which is Kuru Panchal area getting inhabited. Then we have Kosal, Kashi, Videha, and also Magad. So, we have moved up to Bhagalpur area that we just spoke of towards the beginning of this lecture, that the entire stretch from Punjab up to Bihar is now inhabited by a population which is carrying out intensive agriculture by around 600 BC. So, that tells us about this geographical horizon of the Vedic times. Historians have argued, they have debated as to why this shift could have occurred, or was there, or should we be talking in terms of this geographical shift at all. And one proposition is that this shifting could have been on account of some kind of a hydrological change that occurred in the core area of Rigvedic settlement. So, desiccation of Saraswati river, drying up of Saraswati river is cited as one evidence which could have pushed people to move to the middle of the Gangetic plains, which of course had more moisture, more rainfall, and that could have significantly improved the chances of taking to agriculture, because particularly paddy cultivation, because paddy as a crop requires more rainfall, and the soil typologies also, the overall conditions are not semi-arid, as is the case in the Saptasindhu area, where the average rainfall is significantly lower as compared to what we get in the middle Gangetic plains. So, and then other proposition is also of some kind of a demographic pressure, that this area could not sustain population beyond a point, and therefore people had to move to eastward. People had to move eastward and settle in the middle Gangetic plains and so forth. Also, since agriculture seems to be becoming more and more prominent in the later Vedic times, therefore it is also proposed that shifting from pastoral way of life to agricultural way of life could have also led to, or the charm of agricultural way of life, in the sense that it can sustain more number of people on account of surplus production and more complex socio-political organization that it entails and so forth. So, all these propositions are spoken of with reference to the shift, with reference to geography and also economy that we encounter with reference to early Vedic and later Vedic. Now, let's, as discussed earlier, let's spare some thought as to why we should consider the life and times around 1500 to 600 BC as something very distinct from the earlier period of Harappan civilization. Please remember that historians generally use this word Vedic culture. They don't use this level of civilization for this, because in the early part of Vedic times, towns were not usual phenomena. Trade and commerce, long distance trade and commerce is not to be encountered. We don't have evidence of coins in the early part of the Vedic period. So, urban way of life is not the order of the day during the Rig Vedic period, and also the fact that during the time of its composition, it was actually not penned down. So, writing as a tradition, although we can presume, given the sophisticated literature that constitutes Vedic corpus, we can presume that writing could have existed, but in terms of actual specimen, we don't have any evidence, and this we don't get as late as up to the Mauryan times, when Ashokan inscriptions make its entry as the first direct form or first direct evidence of written specimen in terms of an archaeological source. So, these are the reasons as to why we don't use this appellation of civilization for the Vedic period, particularly the early Vedic period. Now, if we look at the overall organization of life in the Harappan times and compare that with the Vedic times, it appears that they are two distinct ways of life that we are talking of. For instance, Harappa stood for a complex economy and intensive agriculture predicated the kind of life that we get to see in Harappan civilization. Whereas Vedic culture seems to be predicated on pastoral economy, a pastoral way of life, and there is not much evidence of agriculture to begin with, so far as Vedic times are concerned. Similarly, for Harappan civilization, we know for sure that long distance trade, craft specialization, and several other paraphernalia related to market economy is very developed in the Harappan times, in the civilizational context of Harappa. Whereas, when we look at the literature or even the archaeological evidence, particularly of early Vedic period, we find that agriculture is very limited. Reference to agriculture as a way of life, or for that matter even agricultural implements or grains for that matter, are not very frequently mentioned in Rig Veda, early Vedic text. And of course, long distance trade and craft specialization is also very meager. Again, in these terms also we find that probably we are talking of two distinct ways of life when we talk of Harappa and the Vedic period. Of course, we have already spoken of the urban social structure during the Harappan period, and in contrast we have simple pastoral social structure in the Vedic times. Similarly, the social structure itself is more differentiated into several classes and occupation groups in Harappan times, whereas in the early Vedic period at least, the society appears to be rather undifferentiated. The gap between haves and have-nots have not accentuated to an extent as it was during the Harappan times. Similarly, in their worshipping traditions also, in their religiosity, we find that Harappan life is characterized by worshipping trees, plants, mother deity, prototype Shiva and so forth, whereas in the Vedic times, in the early Vedic times, usually it is the worship of male gods, anthropomorphic gods that we encounter in the Vedic times, and sacrifice constitute as the chief mode of worshipping in the early Vedic period. And of course, in Harappa, we do not have very many evidence of this. Of course, there are claims where some findings of fire altars, etc., are spoken of as if sacrifice could also have been one possible mode of worshipping and so forth. So, as we discussed earlier, that there are these claims and counterclaims, and the intent beneath these claims and counterclaims is to stretch the chronology of the Vedic period to pre-Harappan times, so that even the Harappan complex can be argued to be part of Vedic complex or Vedic culture as such. But as we can see, it is fairly evident that we are talking of two fairly distinct cultures if one were to look at Harappa and Vedas or Vedic society as such. Now, coming to the early Vedic economy, and from here on we shall rather take it in a little bit of details. Predominantly, as we have said, it is a pastoral economy. Why do we say this? Now, there are more direct references to cattle in Rig Veda. There are prayers for different pashu. So, some of the Rig Vedic hymns desire to have more and more pashu dhan. So, the chief form of wealth seems to be the cattle, and therefore, we have prayers specifically for goat, sheep, horse, man also, and cattle. Similarly, there are terms, as we said earlier, that root word of several terms happen to be cattle, and that also tells us how central the pastoral way of life must have been to the overall situation in early Vedic times. For instance, there is this word gomat. Now, gomat meant a wealthy man. So, a wealthy man, who is a wealthy man? A wealthy man is one who has more number of cows, who has more number of cattle, and that tells us that cattle constituted the chief form of wealth in Rig Vedic times. Similarly, the word for battle is gavishti. So, why battles are fought? Battles are fought to have more and more cattle wealth under one's command, and therefore wars or battles are fought with the intent of acquiring not land not other resources, but cattle resources. So, similarly, the chief himself is referred to as Gopati. So, the king of Rig Veda is Gopati, whereas in subsequent times we find by the end of later Vedic times, the king becomes a Bhupati. Bhupati is one who has control over land, and so territory or land becomes important, and land will not become important until agriculture is intensively practiced on it. So, that is the distinction that we should be making. Similarly, there is the word for daughter is Duhitra in Rig Veda, and Duhitra possibly is the person who milks cow in the household, and probably this was the work that the daughters were supposed to be carrying out in their households, and that is why this word also uses go or go as the root word. And overall, even with relation to the concept of gotra, we find that probably cattle were held together or herded in common. They were tied to one cow pen, and that is the actual meaning of gotra, which stands for a cow pen. And from there on, we have the concept of gotra. Of course, over a period of time, it got associated with the different rishis, and that's how the etymological history of gotra actually goes. But with reference to the Rig Vedic times, we can see that it is hinging on the centrality of gau or cattle as the chief form of wealth. Pasture land, which was so important for a pastoral way of life, so cattle needed grazing space, and there was no individual ownership of grazing space. So, the grazing area were held in common in terms of property ownership. So, there is communal property ownership which is exercised during the early Vedic times. Over the passage of time in history, we find that by the time we reach the Satavahan age and so forth, there is or there are more and more references to individual ownership of land, and that tells us about the changes which informed the entire stretch of time from the Vedic to the start of the Common Era. So, to begin with, they are all held in common, and the cattle which were obtained in raids or as we said in the battle or gavishti, they were redistributed among people at large, redistributed through the events like Gan and Parishad, which were actually councils, and they were held at regular intervals, and where the chiefs and his relatives might have ended with a lion's share of whatever has been captured as a part of Pashudhan or cattle wealth, but a major portion of it was also redistributed amongst the clansmen, and that is why the inequity or a structured inequity in society had some kind of a limitation. It could not move beyond a particular point, but that is how it started. Inequity started also through these agencies. The cattle also constituted the chief form of dan and dakshina. So, whenever we get the context of gifts or dan by Raja to a priest also, then also it is the cattle wealth which is offered. It is not grain as such, it is not land or other stuff, at least up to the Rig Vedic times. So, we would end here, and when I get the chance to meet you again, we shall take it forward from here to the later Vedic times, and that will take care of the changes that happened in this time bracket of Vedic period.
Thank you so much, sir, for this very interesting lecture. Of course, there would be so many ideas that one had been thinking in their minds, but today it becomes clear from the etymology of various terms and how sir has traced the whole genealogy of what we've been talking about today about Godan and what Gotra actually means. So friends, with this we would like to bring the lecture to an end, but just as the sir mentioned, we would be taking this further and talking about later Vedic times in the coming lectures. So with this we thank sir. Thank you so much sir again, and thank you friends for watching. Have a great day.